The gunshot that killed Evelyn Foster's mother on her 7th birthday taught her that celebrations only brought sorrow. And for the next 19 years, she let every anniversary of her birth pass unmarked and unmourned, until the day she stumbled half-frozen into a mountain man's cabin in the Idaho wilderness, and he looked at her like she was something worth celebrating. Ruby City, Idaho sprawled along the base of the Owyhee Mountains in 1878, a mining town that had seen better days but still clung to life with the stubborn determination of its remaining residents. Evelyn worked at the Silver Bell boarding house, scrubbing floors and washing linens from dawn until her hands cracked and bled. She was 26 now, thin from years of inadequate meals and hard labor. With dark blonde hair she kept pinned tight against her skull and gray eyes that had learned not to hope for much. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Hutchins, was a severe woman who believed idle hands invited the devil. She worked Evelyn harder than the other girls, perhaps sensing that Evelyn had nowhere else to go, no family to protest the treatment. Evelyn's father had died in a mine collapse when she was 12. Her brother had gone west to California and never written back. She was alone in the world, and Mrs. Hutchins knew it. November came to Ruby City with bitter winds that howled down from the mountains. Evelyn woke before sunrise on the 17th, the same as any other day, 26 years old today. She pushed the thought away immediately, the way she always did. Birthdays were dangerous. Birthdays brought death. Her mother had been hanging decorations, had turned with a smile to say something to 7-year-old Evelyn, when the stray bullet from a fight outside had crashed through their window and stolen her life in an instant. Evelyn dressed in the dark, her fingers clumsy with cold. The boarding house was never warm enough, Mrs. Hutchins being miserly with coal. She made her way downstairs to start the breakfast fires, her breath misting in the frigid air. "You look peaked," said Grace, one of the other boarding house girls, when she came down an hour later. Grace was younger, 18, still soft in ways Evelyn had forgotten how to be. "You feeling poorly?" "I'm fine," Evelyn said, stirring the porridge. She was always fine. Fine was all she could afford to be, but she wasn't fine. A fever had been building behind her eyes for 2 days now, and her throat felt raw. She worked through breakfast service, then started on the upstairs rooms. By noon, she was swaying on her feet. "Get back to work, Mrs. Hutchins snapped when she found Evelyn sitting on the stairs, trying to catch her breath. "Those linens won't wash themselves." Evelyn forced herself up. She made it through the afternoon, though her hands shook so badly she dropped a pitcher and earned a sharp slap across the face for her clumsiness. By evening, she could barely stand. Mrs. Hutchins took one look at her flushed face and glassy eyes and made a sound of disgust. "Get out," she said. "I won't have sickness spreading through my establishment. You can come back when you're well, please," Evelyn said, the words scraping her throat. "I have nowhere to go." "Should have thought of that before you got sick. Out." Grace tried to protest, but Mrs. Hutchins was immovable. Evelyn found herself on the street as darkness fell, with nothing but the thin coat on her back and the few coins she'd managed to save hidden in her boot. The temperature was dropping fast, and snow had begun to fall. She couldn't afford a room anywhere else. She'd spent years saving for passage to California to find her brother, but even that small hoard wouldn't cover a week's lodging in Ruby City. The town had no charity house, no place for someone like her. She walked the streets as the snow fell harder, her fever making everything seem distant and unreal. By the time she reached the edge of town, she was no longer thinking clearly. There was a trail leading up into the mountains. Some part of her fevered brain thought maybe she could find shelter in the trees, wait out the storm. She started walking. The forest swallowed her quickly. Snow fell thick and fast, covering the trail. Evelyn walked because stopping meant freezing, and even through the fever, her body understood that much. She had no idea how long she walked or how far. Time became meaningless. The world was just cold and white and the burning in her lungs. She fell more than once. Each time it was harder to get back up. The last time she fell, she wasn't sure she could manage it. The snow felt almost soft, almost warm. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, she thought, to just rest here. She'd been so tired for so long. That was when she saw the light. It was faint through the snow, but it was definitely there. Evelyn crawled toward it, her frozen fingers digging into the snow. It took everything she had left. The light grew brighter, resolving into the warm glow of a window. A cabin, solid and real, materialized out of the storm. She made it to the door, used the last of her strength to pound against the wood. Once, twice. The door opened, and Evelyn looked up into the face of the largest man she'd ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that nearly filled the doorway. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle built from years of hard mountain living. Dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her, even through her fever. Deep brown, wide with surprise and immediate concern. "Lord Almighty," he said, his voice a deep rumble. He scooped her up like she weighed nothing at all, which perhaps she nearly didn't after years of inadequate meals. "You're burning up. What in God's name are you doing out in this?" Evelyn tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. The warmth of the cabin was overwhelming after the cold. Everything spun and then went dark. She woke in stages, awareness returning slowly. She was warm, truly warm, for the first time in months. Blankets covered her, heavy and soft. Firelight danced across rough wooden walls. Her dress was gone, she realized with a spike of alarm, replaced by a shirt that was far too large for her. "Easy now," that deep voice said. The huge man was sitting beside the bed, and in the firelight she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 30, with strong, handsome features beneath the beard. His hands, large enough to crush bone, moved with surprising gentleness as he lifted a cup to her lips. "Just water. You need to drink." Evelyn drank, her throat grateful for the cool water. When she'd had enough, he set the cup aside. "I'm Vincent Winters," he said. "This is my cabin. You stumbled up here about 6 hours ago, more dead than alive. What's your name?" "Evelyn Foster," she managed, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Well, Evelyn Foster, you've got yourself a nasty fever and the start of lung sickness if I'm any judge. You're lucky you found this place. Another hour out there and you'd have frozen solid." He reached out and placed one huge palm against her forehead, checking her temperature. "Still too hot." "I'll make you some willow bark tea, it'll help." "My clothes," Evelyn said, feeling her face heat for reasons that had nothing to do with fever. "Soaking wet and frozen solid. I hung them by the fire to dry. Don't worry, I was perfectly respectful." "You needed dry clothes or you'd have died of the cold." He stood, moving to the fireplace. "I've been living in these mountains for 8 years, seen my share of injury and sickness. You're safe here." Evelyn watched him move around the cabin. He was graceful despite his size, economical in his movements the way men got when they lived alone and had no one to perform for. The cabin was small but well made, everything neat and in its place. Furs hung on the walls. Herbs dried from the rafters. A rifle rested above the door. Vincent returned with a steaming mug. He helped her sit up, which required him to slide an arm behind her shoulders. The casual strength in him was staggering. He held the mug steady as she drank the bitter tea, not complaining or rushing her. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "No thanks needed. Can't let a woman die on my doorstep. What were you doing out there? Ruby City's a good 10 miles down the mountain." I got sick. Mrs. Hutchins put me out. Something dark flashed across Vincent's face. Martha Hutchins. That woman's got a heart made of mountain granite. You work at her boarding house. Evelyn nodded. I have for 5 years. She said I could come back when I'm well, but I had nowhere to go during, and I thought maybe I could find shelter in the forest, but I got turned around and— You could have died, Vincent said flatly. You nearly did die. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Well, you're here now, and you'll stay until you're well enough to travel. That's going to be a while, judging by the sound of your breathing. Winter's settling in hard. Might be you're here quite a spell. I can't impose on you like that. It's not an imposition. I've got food enough for 2, and the company will be a pleasant change. Gets quiet up here in winter. He stood, moving back to the fireplace where something was cooking that smelled rich and savory. When's the last time you ate a proper meal? Evelyn couldn't remember. Weeks, maybe. The boarding house girls got the leavings after the guests were fed, and there usually wasn't much left. Vincent ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her. Meat and potatoes and carrots, thick and hot and more delicious than anything she'd tasted in years. Slow now, he cautioned. Your stomach's probably forgotten what real food tastes like. She wanted to devour it, but she forced herself to eat slowly. Vincent watched her, that unreadable expression on his face again. How old are you? He asked. 26, she said, then froze. Today was her birthday. She'd almost forgotten in the chaos of everything else. 26 years old today, and she'd nearly died in the snow. Her mother's face flashed through her mind, the way she'd looked that last morning, and Evelyn's hand started to shake. Vincent gently took the bowl before she could spill it. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm fine. You're trembling like a leaf. Is it the fever? I said I'm fine, Evelyn snapped, then immediately felt terrible. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be sharp. I'm just tired. Vincent studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then rest. We can talk more when you're stronger, but sleep wouldn't come easily. Evelyn lay in the warm bed, listening to the wind howl outside and the crackle of the fire, and thought about birthdays and bullets, and how close she'd come to joining her mother in whatever came after this life. She'd spent 19 years making herself small and unremarkable, working and surviving and never, ever celebrating. And where had it gotten her? Still alone, still one disaster away from death. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to find gray morning light filtering through the window and Vincent moving quietly around the cabin. He saw her eyes open and brought her more water and willow bark tea. How are you feeling? He asked. Like I was trampled by a horse, Evelyn admitted. That's about right. You're going to feel worse before you feel better, I'm afraid. That lung sickness needs time to work through. He checked her forehead again. Fever's down a touch. That's good. He made her eat breakfast, just porridge but rich with butter and honey. She could barely finish half of it before exhaustion pulled her back under. The next few days passed in a fever haze. Vincent cared for her with patient competence, getting her to drink when her throat screamed with pain, changing the blankets when she soaked them with sweat, keeping the fire going so the cabin stayed warm. Sometimes she woke and found him sitting beside the bed, carving something from a piece of wood. Other times he was at the fireplace, cooking or mending clothes, or doing the 100 small tasks that kept a man alive in the mountains. He never seemed to resent her presence or the extra work she created. "Why are you being so kind?" she asked once in a moment of clarity. Vincent looked up from the piece of wood in his hands. "Why wouldn't I be? Most people wouldn't take in a stranger, especially not for so long." "I'm not most people," he said simply. "Besides, you needed help. That's reason enough." As the days passed and the fever gradually broke, Evelyn grew strong enough to sit up for longer periods, to eat full meals, to watch Vincent as he worked. She learned that he trapped furs in the winter and panned for gold in the summer, making enough money for supplies and spending most of his time alone. He'd come to the mountains after the war, looking for peace and quiet after too many years of violence. "I was at Shiloh," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. Evelyn was finally well enough to leave the bed, wrapped in blankets in a chair Vincent had dragged close to the warmth. "Saw things no man should have to see, did things I'm not proud of. When it was over, I just wanted to be somewhere clean. Somewhere the only blood spilled was for food, not politics. You ever miss it? Civilization, I mean." Vincent considered this, his hands busy with the leather strap he was mending. "Sometimes I miss conversation, music, the sound of laughter. But not enough to go back to living pressed up against other folks. People are complicated, mountains are simple." "Until sick women stumble into your cabin," Evelyn said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You're not a complication, Evelyn Foster." 2 weeks after she'd arrived, Evelyn was well enough to help around the cabin. She insisted on it, unable to continue taking Vincent's charity without offering something in return. He protested at first, but she was stubborn, and eventually he relented. She mended his clothes, which were in desperate need of attention. She cooked, giving Vincent a break from his own simple fare. She organized the supplies, learning what he had and where everything lived. The work was familiar, comfortable in its way, but different too because Vincent treated her like a person, not a servant. He thanked her for the meals. He asked her opinion on things. He talked to her like her thoughts mattered. "You're a good cook," he said one evening, finishing a second helping of the rabbit stew she'd made. "Better than me by a long shot. It's not hard when you have good ingredients to work with. You keep a well-stocked cabin. Have to. Winter up here can last 6 months or more. Being unprepared means dying." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You ever think about what you'll do when spring comes?" The question hit Evelyn harder than it should have. She'd been trying not to think about the future, content to exist in this strange, suspended time where the outside world didn't matter. But spring would come eventually, and with it, decisions. "I suppose I'll go back to Ruby City," she said slowly. "Find work somewhere. Mrs. Hutchins might take me back if I beg prettily enough. You could do better than working yourself to death for Martha Hutchins. Perhaps, but women don't have many options. You could stay here," Vincent said. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "What? Stay here, with me?" He leaned forward, his brown eyes intense. "I know it's not proper, and I'm not suggesting anything improper, but you could stay through the winter at least. Keep house and I'll hunt and trap. We'll split everything even. Come spring, if you want to leave, I'll take you back to town myself." "Why would you offer that?" "Because you deserve better than what you've had, and because I like having you here." He said it simply, matter-of-factly, the way he said everything. "The cabin's warmer with two. Food tastes better when there's someone to share it with. And you make me laugh, which I haven't done much of these past few years." Evelyn's throat felt tight. "I don't laugh." "No, but you should. You've got a smile that could light up the whole mountain on the rare occasions you let it show." "You don't know anything about me," she whispered. "I know you're strong. I know you're kind. I know you work harder than anyone should have to." His voice gentled. "I know something hurt you bad enough that you walked into a blizzard rather than ask for help. And I know I'd like the chance to show you that the world doesn't have to be so hard all the time." Tears burned behind Evelyn's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "I can't pay you. Don't want your money. Just your company and maybe some more of that stew." She should say no. She should be sensible and proper, and all the things young women were supposed to be. But when had the world ever been sensible or proper to her? And the thought of going back to Ruby City, to Mrs. Hutchins and the cold boarding house and the endless gray drudgery made something in her chest feel like it was tearing. Just through the winter, she heard herself say. Vincent's face broke into a grin that transformed him, making him look years younger. Just through the winter, he agreed. We'll see how we get on. They got on well. Better than well. As November turned to December and snow piled high around the cabin, Evelyn discovered what it felt like to simply exist without constant fear. Vincent was easy to live with, respectful and considerate and unexpectedly funny. He told her stories about the mountains, about tracking animals and reading weather and 100 small details of wilderness living. She told him about growing up in Ruby City, carefully editing around the painful parts. He noticed, of course. Vincent was far more observant than his quiet demeanor suggested. "You never talk about your family," he said one evening. "There's not much to tell. My father died in the mines. My brother went to California. My mother died when I was 7. I'm sorry. That's hard, losing your mother so young." Evelyn stared into the fire, the flames dancing and blurring. "It was my birthday. She was hanging decorations. There was a fight outside and someone fired a gun and the bullet came through our window." The words came out flat, rehearsed from years of repetition. "After that, my father forbade celebrations of any kind, said they were bad luck. When he died, I just kept the rule, seemed easier that way." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "You've never celebrated your birthday, not once since you were 7. "No." "When is your birthday, Evelyn?" She didn't want to tell him, didn't want to speak the date aloud, but something in his face and the gentle certainty there pulled the truth from her. "November 17th. Vincent sat up straight. "The day you came here, that was your birthday." "Yes, Lord Almighty." "You spent your birthday nearly dying in a blizzard." He looked stricken. "That's the saddest damn thing I've ever heard." "It's just a day," Evelyn said, but her voice cracked on the words. "No, it's not just a day, it's your day. The day you came into this world, that's worth celebrating." "Celebrations bring bad luck. People die." "People die anyway, birthday or not. Your mother's death wasn't because of a celebration, Evelyn. It was because some fool was careless with a gun. That's not your fault, and it's not your birthday's fault." Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been frozen solid for 19 years. "I don't know how to celebrate." Vincent reached over and took her hand, his huge palm engulfing her small one. "Then I'll teach you." The next morning, Evelyn woke to find the cabin transformed. Vincent had hung pine boughs from the rafters, filling the air with their sharp, clean scent. He'd set the table with his best dishes, the ones he usually kept put away. And there, in the center of the table, was a small cake made from precious flour and sugar and dried berries. "What is this?" Evelyn whispered. "It's your birthday," Vincent said. He was watching her carefully as if worried she might bolt. "I know it's a month late, but that doesn't matter. We're celebrating." "Vincent, you can't. Your supplies I can and I will. Sit down." She sat, her legs suddenly shaky. Vincent cut the cake and served her a generous slice. It was simple, probably not as good as what a real baker could make, but to Evelyn it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "I don't have a candle," Vincent said, "but I figure you can make a wish anyway." "I don't know what to wish for." "Wish for something you want, something just for you." Evelyn closed her eyes. What did she want? For so long she'd trained herself not to want anything, wanting led to disappointment. But sitting here in this warm cabin with this impossibly kind man, she let herself want. She wished for more days like this. More mornings waking up without dread. More evenings by the fire with someone who saw her as a person, not just a pair of working hands. She opened her eyes to find Vincent watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Did you wish?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. Now eat your cake. And then we're doing nothing but pleasant things all day. No chores, no work, just celebration." "I don't know how," Evelyn said, and she was horrified to find tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know how to just be happy." Vincent came around the table and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened at first, unused to being touched with kindness, but he just held her gently until she relaxed against his broad chest. He was warm and solid and smelled like pine smoke and leather. "Then I'll teach you that too," he murmured into her hair. "We'll start today and we'll practice every day after. You deserve happiness, Evelyn Foster. You deserve celebration, and I'm going to make sure you get both." They spent that day doing nothing of consequence. Vincent taught her to play cards, which she'd never learned. They were terrible at it, both of them, and they laughed until their sides hurt. He showed her his collection of carved animals, small perfect figures of bears and wolves and eagles that he whittled during long winter evenings. She held each one reverently, marveling at the skill in them. In the afternoon, he bundled them both up and took her outside. The snow was deep, sparkling under weak winter sunlight. Vincent showed her how to track rabbits, pointing out the small signs she'd never have noticed on her own. They walked through the hushed forest, not talking, just being together in the clean white silence. That evening, Vincent made dinner while Evelyn sat by the fire. It should have felt wrong, letting him work while she rested, but he'd forbidden her from helping. "Today, you don't work," he'd said firmly. "Today, someone takes care of you for a change." After dinner, he pulled out a harmonica she hadn't known he owned and played simple, sweet melodies. Evelyn closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made music just for the joy of it. "Thank you," she said when he finally stopped, "for all of this. You don't need to thank me. I'm just sorry it took 26 years for someone to celebrate you properly." "Why are you doing this? Really?" Vincent set the harmonica aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "When I came back from the war, I was hollow. Felt like I'd left the best parts of myself on those battlefields. I came up here figuring I'd live out my days alone, and that seemed fine. Better than fine. I didn't think I had anything left to give another person." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Then you showed up, more dead than alive, and something in me woke back up. Taking care of you, watching you get stronger, hearing you laugh at my terrible jokes, it reminded me what it feels like to matter to someone. To have someone matter to me, and I realized I didn't want to be alone anymore." Evelyn's heart was hammering. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I care about you, more than I probably should after just a few weeks. I'm saying that when you talk about leaving in the spring, it feels like someone's putting a fist around my heart and squeezing." He met her eyes, his gaze steady and sure. "I'm saying I'd like you to stay. Not as a housekeeper or a guest, as my partner. As someone I'm building a life with." "Vincent," she breathed. "You don't have to answer now. I know it's fast and I know you barely know me, but I want you to know where my heart is. And I want you to know that every day you're here is a celebration as far as I'm concerned. Not because it's some special occasion, but because you're here. Because you're alive. Because you deserve to be celebrated just for being who you are." Evelyn couldn't speak. Couldn't find words big enough for what was happening inside her chest. So instead, she stood and crossed the small space between them. Vincent looked up at her, surprise and hope warring on his handsome face. She leaned down and kissed him. It was tentative at first, uncertain, because Evelyn had never kissed anyone before and wasn't sure she was doing it right. But Vincent made a soft sound and reached up to cup her face in his huge, gentle hands, and then it didn't matter because he was kissing her back with a tenderness that made her want to cry. When they finally broke apart, Vincent was smiling. "I'll take that as a yes to staying." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Yes to staying, yes to all of it." December passed in a blur of small joys. Vincent continued his campaign to teach Evelyn how to celebrate, and it turned out there were endless small things worth celebrating. The first good snowfall, a successful hunt, the simple fact of waking up warm and safe. He found reasons to mark nearly every day as special, and slowly, painfully, Evelyn learned to let herself feel joy without waiting for the other shoe to drop. They grew closer, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Evelyn discovered that Vincent sang to himself while he worked, usually old war songs or hymns his mother had taught him. Vincent learned that Evelyn had a sharp wit that had been buried under years of hardship, but emerged more often now that she felt safe. They kissed often, sweet stolen moments that never progressed further because Vincent was adamant about treating her properly. "When we do this right, it'll be as husband and wife," he said one evening when things were getting heated by the fire. "I won't dishonor you, Evelyn." "I don't care about honor," she said breathlessly. "Well, I do. You deserve everything done right, proper courting, proper marriage, proper everything." He pulled back, though it clearly cost him. "I've waited this long to find someone worth waiting for. I can wait a bit longer." January brought brutal cold and shorter days. They were snowed in for a week, the drifts piling so high they couldn't open the door. Vincent told her stories of war and childhood while Evelyn worked through her own painful memories, slowly sharing pieces of her past she'd never told anyone. "I was so angry at my mother for so long," she admitted one night. "Angry that she died and left me alone. I know it wasn't her fault, but I was 7, and I didn't understand. I just knew she was gone, and every birthday after was a reminder of what I'd lost." "You were a child dealing with trauma," Vincent said. "There's no wrong way to feel about that." "I think I blamed myself too. Like if we hadn't been celebrating, if she hadn't been hanging decorations, maybe she would have been somewhere else when the bullet came through." "That's not how it works. You know that, right? You couldn't have controlled where that bullet went any more than you could have controlled the weather." "I know. In my head, I know, but my heart took longer to catch up." Vincent pulled her close, and she curled against his broad chest, feeling safe in a way she'd never felt before. "Your mother would want you to celebrate," he said softly. "She'd want you to be happy." "I think maybe I'm learning how," Evelyn said. By February, it was clear to both of them that this was forever. Vincent proposed properly on Valentine's Day, getting down on one knee despite the fact that they were alone in a cabin miles from civilization, and she'd already said yes in every way that mattered. "Evelyn Foster, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to celebrate you every day for the rest of our lives. I promise to keep you safe and warm and as happy as I can manage. I promise to never let you forget that you deserve every good thing this world has to offer." "Yes," Evelyn said, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes, yes, yes." They couldn't marry until spring when they could get back to Ruby City and find a minister, but it didn't matter. They were committed to each other in every way that counted. The ring Vincent made for her from a gold nugget he'd saved was more precious than any store-bought jewelry could have been. March brought the first hints of thaw. The days grew longer, and the snow began to recede. Vincent started making plans for their trip down the mountain. "We'll go to Ruby City, find the Reverend, get properly married," he said. "Then we'll come back here, unless you want to stay in town." "No," Evelyn said immediately. "I want to be here, with you. This is home now." They made the trip in late April when the trails were finally passable. Ruby City looked smaller than Evelyn remembered, dirtier and more cramped after months in the clean mountain air. She saw Mrs. Hutchins on the street, and the older woman's eyes went wide. "Evelyn Foster, "We thought you died in the snow." "I didn't die," Evelyn said calmly. "I survived. And now I'm getting married." She introduced Vincent, who loomed beside her like a protective mountain. Mrs. Hutchins looked him up and down, clearly trying to decide if this was a respectable match or a scandal. "Well," she finally said, "I suppose congratulations are in order." They were married that afternoon by Reverend Michaels, with Grace and her sweetheart Tom as witnesses. Grace hugged Evelyn so hard she nearly cracked her ribs. "I'm so happy for you," Grace whispered. "You look different, happier." "I am happy," Evelyn said, and realized it was completely true. They bought supplies with Vincent's saved gold and headed back up the mountain as husband and wife. The cabin felt different now, warmer and more complete. That night, Vincent made love to her with the same gentleness and intensity he brought to everything, and Evelyn finally understood what it meant to be cherished. The years that followed were hard in many ways. Mountain living was never easy. Winters were brutal, and supplies sometimes ran low. But they were hard together, and that made all the difference. Vincent kept his promise, finding reasons to celebrate every single day. Sometimes it was big things like Evelyn's birthday or their anniversary. More often, it was small things like the first wildflowers of spring or a particularly beautiful sunset, or just the fact that they'd made it through another day together. Evelyn learned to hunt and trap alongside Vincent. She learned to read weather in the clouds and find her way through the forest. She grew strong and capable in ways she'd never imagined. But more importantly, she learned to be happy, to laugh freely, to look forward to tomorrow instead of just dreading it. Their first child, a boy they named Victor, was born in the spring of 1880. Vincent delivered him because they couldn't make it down the mountain in time, and he cried when he held his son for the first time. "He's perfect," Vincent said, his voice choked. "You're perfect. God, Evelyn, I love you so much." They had 2 more children in the years that followed, both girls named Eddie and Emma. The cabin grew crowded and loud and full of life. Vincent built an addition, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. Evelyn celebrated every single one of her children's birthdays with joy instead of fear. She made cakes and sang songs and hung decorations without flinching at the sound of gunfire that sometimes echoed up from the valley below. She was reclaiming what had been stolen from her, one celebration at a time. On Evelyn's 32nd birthday, Vincent surprised her by taking her to a meadow high up the mountain. He'd ridden up earlier and prepared a picnic, complete with all her favorite foods and wildflowers arranged in mason jars. "What's all this?" she asked, laughing as he helped her off her horse. "A celebration of you," he said simply. 6 years ago today, you walked into my cabin and changed my life. I wanted to mark the occasion properly." They ate and talked and made love under the wide sky. Afterward, lying in Vincent's arms with the sun warm on her face, Evelyn felt a peace she'd never thought possible. "I used to think birthdays were cursed," she said softly, "that celebrating would only bring pain. And now I think maybe they were just waiting for the right person to show me how to do it right." She propped herself up to look at him. "Thank you for celebrating me, Vincent. For making every day feel special." "You are special," he said, pulling her down for a kiss. "And I'm going to keep celebrating you every day for the rest of our lives. That's a promise." He kept that promise for the next 40 years. Through raising their children and eventually their grandchildren, through hard winters and dry summers, through joy and loss and all the ordinary moments in between, Vincent Winters celebrated Evelyn Foster Winters like she was the most precious thing in his world, because to him, she was. Their children grew up wild and happy in the mountains, learning their father's skills and their mother's resilience. Victor became a trapper like his father, Eddie married a rancher and moved to Boise. Emma became a teacher, traveling between the small mountain communities. They all carried with them the lesson their parents had taught them, that every day was worth celebrating, and the people you loved were worth honoring. As Evelyn and Vincent grew older, they moved down from the high cabin to a small house on the outskirts of Ruby City. Vincent's joints couldn't take the harsh mountain winters anymore, and they both wanted to be closer to doctors and their growing collection of grandchildren. But they never forgot those early years when it had been just the two of them against the world. On Evelyn's 70th birthday, their children threw her a party that filled the house to bursting. There were 3 kinds of cake, and enough people to make her feel overwhelmed in the best possible way. As she looked around at her children and grandchildren, at the life she'd built from nothing, Evelyn felt Vincent's hand slip into hers. "Happy birthday, love," he murmured. "Thank you for teaching me how to have them," she said, squeezing his fingers. "Thank you for letting me." They danced that night, slowly and carefully because their bodies weren't what they used to be. But Vincent held her like she was still the half-frozen girl who'd stumbled into his cabin all those years ago, precious and worth saving. "You ever regret it?" Evelyn asked. "Taking me in that night?" "Your life would have been simpler without me. Simpler, maybe, but infinitely emptier." Vincent kissed her forehead. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Evelyn Winters. Saving you saved me right back." Vincent Winters died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, with Evelyn holding his hand. His last words were, "Every day with you was a celebration." Evelyn lived another 3 years, surrounded by family and love. She spent her final birthday at her granddaughter's house, eating cake and telling stories about the mountain man who taught her that life was worth celebrating. She spoke of Vincent with joy, not sorrow, because he'd given her so many years of happiness that grief felt almost greedy. When she closed her eyes for the last time, she was thinking of that first late birthday in the mountain cabin, of pine boughs and simple cake, and a man who'd looked at her like she was worth the world. She was thinking of all the ordinary days he'd made extraordinary just by sharing them with her. She was thinking that maybe birthdays weren't cursed after all. Maybe they were just opportunities for the right people to show you how much you mattered. And Vincent Winters had shown her every single day for 53 years. The night Evelyn died, her grandson found a letter in her things addressed to her children. In her careful handwriting, she'd written, "I spent the first 26 years of my life believing I wasn't worth celebrating. Then I met your father, and he spent the rest of my life proving me wrong. Celebrate each other. Celebrate your children. Celebrate every ordinary day because none of them are promised. That's the greatest gift anyone can give, and it's the gift your father gave me. Pass it on." They buried her next to Vincent on the mountain where they'd fallen in love, in a meadow that filled with wildflowers every spring. The headstone was simple. Evelyn Foster Winters, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. Every day was a celebration, and it was true. From that snowy night in November 1878, when she'd stumbled into a mountain man's cabin, to her last breath surrounded by the family she and Vincent had built together, every day had been a celebration. Not because they were all easy or all perfect, but because she'd finally learned the lesson Vincent had been trying to teach her from the beginning. That life itself was worth celebrating. That she was worth celebrating. That love, given freely and generously, could transform even the darkest birthday into something beautiful. And that sometimes the greatest gift one person could give another was simply to show them that they mattered. Every single day, without exception. Forever.